Welcome to part 2 of my video response to Rex 1234567 Protect Our Kids. So like I was saying, and excuse the disorganization, but as I was saying in the previous video, that yes, the cartoons you listed aren't appropriate for small children, very young children, like 3, 4, 5 years old, possibly 6 years old. But not for the reasons that you listed, in my opinion. But no, if I had children, and I would like children one day, you know, when I'm married, my husband and I will plan for when we want children, and when we both decide it's the right time and that we want to be parents, we'll have children. And I definitely agreed with you towards the end of the video that yes, you should monitor what your children watch. That's their responsibility as a parent. That's not the responsibility of children's media. But just because that's not the responsibility of most children's media doesn't mean that it's malicious or insidious or trying to turn your children into degenerates or freaks. The thing is, I have a great deal of respect for children and of the intellect of children, and I'm not anti-censorship. There's obviously a time and place for everything, and yes, there are some things that are universally inappropriate for children, like obviously, sex, gore, very heady political themes or things like that. Obviously, that's not okay. That's not appropriate for children. I'm not arguing that. I'm not anti-censorship or nothing extreme like that. But at the same time, most children's media is not just exclusively for small children. They market things to the 8-year-olds, the 9-year-olds, the 10, 11, 12-year-olds. The difference between a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old might not seem like a big deal, but on average, that's a huge maturity difference. And what appeals to and speaks to the 5-year-old isn't going to speak to the 8-year-old. And what's appropriate to expose to an 8-year-old isn't, for a 5-year-old. That's a huge difference that I think a lot of these, that I think some parents don't really consider, and they'll see a cartoon that isn't, marketed to their very small children, and they'll come to the conclusion that it's just going to have a detrimental effect on all children. Like two of the cartoons you brought up, you said they featured parental neglect, the Fairly Odd Parents, and Jimmy Neutron. Well, again, this also goes back to what I said about the context of actions and of characters' motivations. It's clear that when the parents are like goofing off or screwing up, we're clearly letting the audience know that they're not doing the right thing, that what they're doing is bad. They don't necessarily receive comeuppance for this, but for most people who are over the age of 6, they're going to realize, that that's a bad thing. But also, the protagonists of those two shows, they're both 10 years old, and they go through things on the show that some 10-year-olds can relate to, or just exaggerated, wacky, random things that might entertain a smaller child, but only a 10-year-old could relate to. And that goes back to, what I'm saying. A 10-year-old has a firm grasp of the difference between reality and fiction and fantasy. And a lot of these jobs and a lot of these shows, rather their quality is subjective, and I'm not really going to get into that because it's irrelevant now. My own personal opinion of these shows' entertainment quality or art quality, that's irrelevant right now. But I am going to say that I have a great deal of respect for children's intellect and for children's ways of problem solving and coming up with their own ideas. Even though they are children, children belong in a child's place. Still, all children still have their own unique personalities and likes and dislikes, just as we adults do. And much like children need escapism, and they need fun and entertainment. And most children's media is not for the sake of education, just like most of the adult media isn't for the sake of education. It's for the sake of entertainment. So it's not these shows' responsibility to educate our children, or to make a mark, or to make that type of mark on children. And in my honest opinion, quality parenting, or even just average parenting, isn't going to be deprogrammed by a show or a movie. I mean, most kids, if they see something, they're not going to repeat it unless the kid is like 2 or 3. And again, depending on the context of the action, they're not going to repeat it. But majority of the time, parents have a firm grasp of, children have a firm grasp of what's right and wrong in an average, in a very healthy household. There you do have people who just allow their children to just allow pop culture and the idiot box to just raise their kids, and they don't talk to their children. But clearly you're not that type of father, and I commend you for that. I commend you for being that type of parent that monitors what your kids watch. I definitely agree with that. What I just disagreed with was you vilifying those particular shows and your criteria for why you think they're bad for children in general. That's what I strongly disagree with. I think the people who hold similar views, they don't look at the fact that children, they don't look at the fact that children who are ages 6 and up, they understand right from wrong. They understand reality from fantasy, and they're just watching, a cartoon just to be fun or just to laugh at it. Because again, America has a history of making cartoons that are exclusively comedy as well as being family oriented. So I disagree with that, and I also disagree with your own personal interpretations of what you see in those programs. Although you did make a valid point that it is popular in these programs to have the cliche stock character of the tomboyish, plucky girl, or the smart girl, or the strong woman, and then the guy, and then the guy's an idiot. That is a rather annoying trend that should stop, or at the very least be balanced. The guys shouldn't all be goofy, shouldn't all be morons, and the smart guys shouldn't all be like inept nerds. That was a legitimate point that I do agree with you on, but I just disagree that these cartoons are out to make kids stupid or anything, because the makers of these cartoons make it very clear by both their ratings and the marketing strategies that these are not for small children. By not only the ratings and marketing strategies, but the time of day that they air. Usually, when you mentioned The Simpsons, and again, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. You said there may be some Americans who don't understand that The Simpsons is for adults. I really don't see how anyone cannot understand that. First of all, The Simpsons is so deeply rooted in American pop culture, and it's been that way since the early 90s. Since the very beginning, everyone's made it very clear that The Simpsons is for adults, and only adults. I mean, it comes on at the prime time, for crying out loud. It usually comes on at I live on the East Coast. It typically comes on at like 7 p.m. On 7 p.m. on the non-cable channels, the non-specialty channels. And prime time on the non-specialty channels, the channels that aren't dedicated to cartoons or anything, that's typically when children's programming ends. In fact, children's programming on those channels typically ends at 4 p.m. because after all, the kids like I said, the kids go to school, they come back from school around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. They might want to unwind and snack or something, and maybe watch a few cartoons, then start on their homework if their parents would be so, lenient, and a lot of parents are. But, kids aren't going to typically don't watch TV at 7 p.m., especially not the really young children. So there's no way The Simpsons has ever been marketed as a family cartoon or a children's cartoon in any sense. And it's been on the air for 2 decades, or over 2 decades, rather. No, not even just 2 decades, over 2 decades. So I don't see how anybody of average intellect could come to the conclusion that it's for children, unless maybe they're not American. Colonel Wisdom out.